With the latest on the corporate front, all the market trends, expert opinion, and sound business advice. It's your unique window into the business world, direct from the heart of China. This is Biz Today.
Welcome to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Coming up, we will have half an hour of business news and analysis. Our stories include China's industrial profits surge over 83% in the first 5 months of this year. And the country is also expected to launch nationwide carbon trading market. And now let's begin with our top story. Official data shows that China's industrial profits soared by 83.4% year-on-year during the January to May period to about 3.4 trillion yuan. This is mainly due to the stable recovery of demand. And compared with the same period of 2019, the profits of major industrial companies rose by 48%. In May alone, the profits of China's major industrial firms rose by 36.4%. So for more on this and China's economy, join us on the line now Charles Liu, co-founder and former chairman of Hao Capital, and also Einar Tangen, author and columnist. So good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to our show.
Good evening, Zhao Yang.
So first, Einar, what were the main drivers behind the rapid growth in profits for China's industrial firms in the first 5 months of this year?
Basically, demand, what you see is a surging demand from a recovering world, also within China. You've seen a lot, but it wasn't as strong as they had wanted it to be, but it's still very strong. It's been a really, really good 12 months for China. It's actually been amazing that they've been able to do as much as they did coming out of COVID-19, especially when you start comparing it to other countries and where they are now. There's some concerns about, flare-ups with COVID-19 happening in different parts of the world, and we'll have to see how that affects demand going forward.
Mm-hmm. And so, Charles, actually, demand is a key word from Einar's comments. But how do you see the current global pandemic trend and global economic climate impacting the recovery of China's industrial firms?
Well, I think I go back to what Einar said. It is global demand of global recovery, China included, of course, that has increased demand on industrial production. But again, as Einar said, we don't know what's going to happen. There are pockets of new outbreaks which are not good signs, which will potentially harm the supply chain in other countries, which may be a good thing for Chinese exporters.
But commodity prices have been surging. So, Einar, what are the positive and negative impacts of this for the Chinese industry?
Well, you basically separate it into upstream and downstream. Those who in energy and things like that, on producers and chemical producers within China have done very well. Those who are at the mercy of raw materials, obviously, they have not done as well. So people are watching very carefully. The big issue is not just inflation in China. It's a worldwide inflation. You're starting to see, unmistakable signs that this is not going to be a temporary situation, and that it's a question of how much inflation comes along and what that does to economies. Remember, all of these cash-strapped countries, developed countries, U.S. and Europe in particular, and Japan have just loaded themselves down with debt. Movements in how much they have to pay for that debt could be just crippling to all of their economies.
Mm-hmm. And so, Charles, what do you think? The commodity prices will continue to surge, or how will it impact the upstream and downstream of the industry?
I think Einar has covered it fully. Commodity prices has been surging, and if the quantitative easing or money printing continues, as well as the problems with logistics and supply chain continue, the prices could not come down. They will stay up.
But Charles, so for high-end manufacturing, so I want to discuss with you. So what are the main sectors in which China is making an effort?
robotics, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, 5G is moving very quickly. And these are all sectors which China has been working on actively after the Trump administration started to blockade China and trying to take China out of these markets. But the Chinese enterprises are moving heavily into these sectors. Robotics will increase significantly the efficiency of high-end manufacturing. And IoT, Internet of Things, will also do the same. And you have to have 5G, and China is the only country today that has a full 5G setup.
So, Aina, actually Charles mentioned a lot, robotics, 5G, AI, IoT, about this high-end manufacturing. But do you think, China have some breakthrough in the other, area of high-end equipment manufacturing? For example, the Baihetan hydropower station in China with the second largest maximum capacity in the world is another good example of high-end equipment manufacturing, right?
Yeah, I think Charles was talking about areas where either China has to start manufacturing internally, and there's a lot of pressure because they need to produce goods, and areas where there could be export. Obviously, China continues to plow ahead in terms of creating more base. But I want to bring out something that Charles said to me the other day, which is, what you have here, and people should be thinking about this, is on the high-tech area, all the things you said, high-tech manufacturing, that is under attack, and you are starting to see, divergence between the economies, between the developed world and China. But in all other areas, whether it's shoes, clothes, and things like that, you're not seeing anything. No one has the money to put into that. Now, there's a tremendous amount of business, and we've seen that in the export numbers, where Americans, they need new clothes. They went into lockdown, they ate a little too much, and all of a sudden they need some new clothes. Guess where those clothes are going to be coming from? So it's a situation where we're tending to look at the very high end of the market, but there's a huge iceberg beneath the waters that is going to remain a constant as we go forward. And that's why I keep saying that China is going to do very well for a considerable period of time, because there's just going to be no money to invest in new plant and machinery to make these things somewhere else.
And so, Charles, Aina mentioned the China's exports, and we've seen that China's exports surged, 30% to more than 8 trillion yuan between January and May. So, what does it tell us about, our economy? Are exports still a main driver of China's economy?
30% is very significant, certainly. But this is what we've been talking about so far this evening, is global demand. Because you have a problem. Only China, together with maybe some of the Southeast Asian or other Asian countries, have a complete supply chain that can continue to produce and manufacture. In other places, in Europe, in the United States, a lot of the supply chains have been broken down for one reason or another. And it's very, very difficult for them to rebuild it, especially since newfound pandemic variants are now blockading borders again. So if that continues, supply chains will continue to be blocked, and only China can be the manufacturing center for the whole world.
And so supply chain is quite important for every country. And Aina, while China's exports surged 30% in the first 5 months, the pandemic has crippled the world trade, especially shipping. A shortage of containers is one of the main bottlenecks to be tackled. So do you think China's exports will be affected by this in the latter half of the year?
Well, it's already being affected. Now, people are kind of wondering, well, what happened? There used to be plenty of containers. So when these ships are coming from China and other places and they're landing in developed nations, unfortunately, what they're doing is they're offloading the containers, but all the materials are remaining in the containers, and they're there for anywhere from a week to 6 weeks to 2 months. That's why there's a shortage of containers. People are literally using them for storage because they're not able to process them through. They need them. There's a demand for them, but there are logistics problems in terms of getting them to warehouses, etc. So that's why you're having that. Also, because of uncertainty, what happened in the Suez Canal, you've had a backlog that's kind of still there. I mean, IKEA still has a bunch of boats sitting there. There's some other companies that have some boats, and they're trying to figure out to get a slot to get through there. So, things have been disrupted. And this is the real problem with this idea that the U.S. is pushing that, it'll just be fine. We'll just disrupt China and everything will be great. No, it isn't going to be great. Prices are going to go up. This is not a time for a lot of inflation when you're trying to recover from a very, very, very drastic, one of the worst economic tsunamis that we've had in a long, long time. And, they're blithely going through this thing and pretending that everything's going to be great. It isn't. The world has to come together, not only on COVID-19, but on an economic plan, or there is going to be a lot of trouble. Not for China. China will continue to be a base for it. But all the other countries, places in South America and Africa, we're already starting to see fractures, social unrest, and that will continue as long as there's not a real economic plan of the powers joining together.
Mm-hmm. And so, Charles, we have already talked about the external environment of China's economy, but there is also a consensus that China's recovery should be boosted by the domestic consumption. But do you think the rising home prices is a bottleneck to drag down the consumption?
Yes, it would have an impact, the rising home prices. But it is very Chinese to want to buy a home. So I think you can't really stop the housing sector to continue to develop. But domestic consumption, given rise of income as well, and the increasing numbers in the middle class, I don't think the home prices will be a bottleneck. I wouldn't address it as a dragging down consumption.
Mm-hmm. And so, Ina, we've seen the authorities making moves to cool down the housing markets. Have those measures worked, or what do you think is the housing sector's role in China's economy?
Well, it's a savings bank. Unfortunately, it's a speculative one because if you're buying a house that you're not going to use and you do not, decorate it and put it out to rent, it's basically an underutilized asset. So at this point, people are just betting that the price will go up, that it's kind of like a bond or a stock or something like that, but it isn't. And Charles and I talked extensively about that, and he pointed out that within the next 2 years, China's been talking about instituting a property tax. When that comes along, that will have a very marked effect. Now, I'm sure that they will ease it in. They'll let people try to figure things out. But that could free up a lot of housing as people realize that they either have to decorate and rent, in which case you're going to have perhaps more rentals than demand, and that will drop. Then people will see it more as a working asset and less as just a store of value.
Mm-hmm. And Ina, so employment is also, has been one of the top priorities for the policymakers. And the job market saw some recovery, reporting unemployment rate of 5% in May. So with a continuous urbanization process in China, what can be done actually to create more jobs?
Well, a lot of that has to do with economic activity. I mean, the Chinese government has the dual track system. I think it's so far it's working very well, but you have unknowns. Global demand, as we have said many times on this show, is a huge factor, and you can't. That's not something that China can affect. The incompetency of other governments in handling of their economic affairs and their health affairs, it's just there's no way that's an unknown, and you just kind of have to wait. Now that we're seeing the emergence of this, D variant and the effects in Australia, now they're going back to the days when they have dispersed infections going around. India continues to be an issue. Indonesia, all these places are really having a very hard time. Meanwhile, the West is talking about vaccines maybe next year. Mm-hmm. China is actually doing it now. And it's just, it's a real contrast in how these things are being done, that they are putting out as much PPE, testing kits, and vaccines as possible. And if they can do that, hopefully they do it. But that's how you're going to get jobs in China. It's a world recovery. That's why I keep stressing that this is a plan for everybody. It's not a plan where one country will, China will do better than the rest, but it will do much better if everyone else is doing better as well.
Well, we're speaking with Einar Tangen, author and columnist, and also Charles Liu, co-founder and former chairman of Hub Capital. So after a short break, we'll take a look at carbon trading. Stay with us.
Ever worry that you'll miss out on breaking events? Tune in to Today to get the latest news and analysis on the important stories in China and around the globe. Today, illuminating the news that matters to you.
You're listening to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. China is expected to launch a nationwide carbon emission trading system in Shanghai quite soon. The volume of carbon emissions covered by the trading market will hit more than 4 billion tons, making it the world's largest carbon emission trading market. And with the carbon trading program ready to start, domestic and foreign experts have high hopes for China's role in achieving carbon neutrality. So, Einar, first of all, carbon trading enables the purchase and sales of permits and credits for the CO2 Commission. So, can you tell us, how will the Shanghai carbon trading market work?
Okay, so this is a story 10 years in the making. I'm not going to go too much in the history. We'll just go fast forward to today. The carbon credits will be doled out for free. So each power. Now, the only one sector is going to be involved, and that's the power sector. So, but that is, that's about 40% of China's emissions, and China is about 25% of the world's total emissions. So this is really big. It, in essence, will raise the amount of carbon output that is covered by this kind of program from 9 to 17%, almost doubling it. So these credits are going to be given to these companies. They can then sell them or whatever. At the end of the year, though, they have to show a certificate and they have to show enough credits to cover what they produced. Now, there's a lot of devil in the details. Originally, this was going to cover 7 sectors. But it's taken quite a long time to figure it out. The Chinese government spent a tremendous amount of time talking to experts in the EU and California where they have done this. They had to adapt it for China's trade. So a lot of people are looking for cap and trade, where you cap the total amount on each year, and then each year you bring that cap down. And then the idea is to force people into it. But China has different characteristics. What they're doing is the government's going to set the cap. They're leaving themselves some flexibility, obviously, in terms of the unknowns, as we were talking about global demand and things like this. But it's clear that the goal is by 2030, they want to hit peak, and by 2060, they need to hit neutrality. So if given the way that China works, they will work to those goals. And as a result, there are people out there saying, well, what's going to happen and things like that, because it's not set in stone. That's appropriate for developed countries where you have industries which have to have set ideas. Whereas in China, it's a very, very different situation.
And Charles, so the EU's emissions trading system is one of the world's top carbon markets and representing roughly 80% of the trading volumes. And China's national carbon market will be the world's largest by quota size. So how important do you think is it to advocate carbon neutrality in a market-oriented way?
I think, as Einar has said, that it's not a question of purely commercial. The commercial in the Chinese system is somewhat different because it's quotas granted to enterprises by the government, and then you end up having a year-end audit, which will impact on your carbon credit or non-credit. Now, it is certainly important to try a more commercial or market-oriented way, as well as a more organized plan or strategic way by the government. China's situation is quite different from the EU. So I think it will be parallel track, commercial plus central government organization.
So I know both you and Charles says China's situation is different from EU, and China's, of course, national carbon market will surpass the EU market and become the largest in the world. And judging from the experience of the European one, it is difficult for the carbon market to function perfectly in the very beginning, and it seems to be, continuously improved. And the EU carbon market has been in operation from as early as 2005 and undergone many kind of revisions. So what difficulties did the EU market face, and what lessons can we learn from it?
Well, it's always coming down. First off, you have to allocate these credits, and there has to be. They took a cap and trade approach to this, as I was talking about earlier. But then you have to have verification. You say you only emitted so much. You have to know that. And when this was starting in 2005, the kind of sensors and the materials, the technology we have today were not available. And as a result, you had to have audits. They added more expense and things like that. So there was a lot of unhappiness at the kind of paperwork and also the opportunities to game the system. Because once you set one of these things in motion, there are always people who are trying to figure out how they can make money by doing nothing. I mean, it's nothing against Tesla, but a large part of their profit is derived from these carbon credits. And in fact, more profit is from the carbon credits than actually from the cars themselves. So, this is a very strange phenomena. You want to have carbon, low carbon manufacturing, but you don't want companies just doing it. And that's basically what you have. Now, one of the big differences is that China's carbon credit system will not be linked to the international. It will be separate. It will be within China itself. And it will, so the pricing is going to be there. They're estimating it's going to be about 49 yuan per ton. And that's about double what they were running in the 9 pilots that they had. That involved about 3,000 firms. And this is mostly large firms that are involved here. Very, power generation and heat generation for cities and municipalities and these large entities. So it'll be interesting to see how they put this together.
And so, Anna, how efficient do you think will the carbon trading system be in terms of reducing the carbon emissions? And how will it reshape the industrial supply chain?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, right now, as I said, they ran 9 different pilots throughout China, and they were trying to see how this goes. And they finally just said, look, we can't wait anymore. Xi Jinping made his statement. He said, we are going to establish these goals, and that means you guys got to get started. Because they came initially, they had some very aggressive plans. In 2011, they had a period where they were saying, well, from 2011 to 15, they wanted to cover 8 sectors, and there was real concerns about how that would affect the economy and production and things like that. So it was put off year to year, and now 2021 is the year that it's going to be put in place. But they don't know exactly everything's happened because China's conditions are different, because they're not doing a cap and trade, because they don't have a futures market on this. So this is literally that at the end of the year, there's going to be a mad rush to the auction block where people are going to have to bid in order to get compliant. But there's also this issue that even if you violate it, the fine for violating is only 30,000 yuan. So there might be some feeling that, well, I can take the penalty rather than get compliant. But I can guarantee you, after this year, they're going to sit, wait, see how everything goes, and then in the future, next year, they're going to start cracking down. Anybody who's gaming the system, they're going to squeeze them out. They're going to start raising, the performance indexes that they want, and they will get there. It's just a question. When you're starting something like this, you do not want economic disruption. You do not want, in essence, the cost of power being passed on to the people who are using it, either directly or indirectly, and causing more problems, especially in a time when everybody's concerned about inflation.
Mm-hmm. And Charles, so besides setting up the carbon trading market, what other measures have been taken for the country to, become carbon neutral? So what about levying a carbon tax?
In fact, this is more like it is the whole system is a carbon tax, but there are other ways of describing a carbon tax. For me, I think the most important thing for the country to do is to have more rapid scientific and technological breakthroughs that reduces carbon emission and produces things more efficiently, produces power more efficiently. There are a number of sectors in which they can contribute significantly to carbon emission reduction, new and renewable sources of energy, use of electric vehicles, and many, many things, and batteries and so on. If these technologies actually come through in the next couple of years, as we hope they do, and Einar is an expert on this, I think that would contribute more to carbon tax in terms of the Chinese and the global situation.
So Einar, Charles actually mentioned that scientific and technological breakthrough we should depend on that may solve this problem. What do you think?
Well, I agree completely. Technology is the only way out of it, because when you start looking at this, Charles and I are just discussing this on and off for many months, and the issue here is the cost of retrofitting. If you're building a new plant today, you can build it so that it's in compliance and it's lower carbon, all right, and that's good. But if you have an existing plant, to retrofit that plant is almost as expensive as building a new plant. And all that has to be, it's an additional cost to everybody. It has to be passed on or paid for by somebody. So this carbon trading system is there to address that, to slowly ease people towards being more efficient. And the more efficient depends on technology. That ability to have scrubbers in your coal, if you are going to have coal, to clean it up as much as possible to reduce the side effects, especially get rid of the sulfur that's in there. Also to do carbon capture as part of your process itself. There are ways to take the carbon and make it useful and sell it. It does require some money, but if you build it into the system, it's a lot cheaper than trying to add it on afterwards.
And
if I could just
Go
add
ahead.
one bit to that, you cannot tell developing countries which are developing, which are trying to improve their lives and develop and build their societies, they cannot do it because of carbon emissions. You have to allow them to go through the process as well.
So, Einar, do you agree with Charles?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, right now it's fine for the developed countries who actually created this problem in the first place. They point to China and say, 25% of the world's emissions are coming from you. But the fact is, these emissions have built up over many, many years, and both Europe and America and parts of China, they polluted themselves to prosperity, and it's incumbent on them to acknowledge that and start helping out these poorer countries. because we're all in this. This isn't a situation where America wins and everyone else loses. This is a situation where we will all lose because global warming is something we have one planet and we have to deal with that.
Well, thank you for both of the two gentlemen, and that was Ina Tangen and Charles Liu. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening.